This is Michael Popok. It's After Dark. Do you know where your legal AF is? I want to compare Donald Trump now and Donald Trump in 2016 to Terminator 1 and Terminator 2. Why not? You know that T2, that silver medal guy, was more powerful, more dangerous, more lethal than Arnold Schwarzenegger. Of course, he ended up being beaten by Arnold Schwarzenegger, and the same thing's going to happen with T2, Trump 2. What am I talking about here? Putting all kidding aside, Trump 1, T1, filed all their losing, election denying, election interfering lawsuits, 70 of them, after he already lost. Now they've learned. It's like machine learning. T2 has decided they're going to start filing their election interfering lawsuits and claiming fraud before there's even an election. There you go. Do it now. Do it now. Claim before people have even voted that there's already voting fraud. And then give and buy yourself some time is what they're trying to do to throw sand in the gears of the election process, the certification process. And if you thought Jan 6, 2020 was wild, wait till you see what could happen Jan 6th or the appropriate date in 2025. And we're going to follow it all on the MeidasTouch Network and on Legal AF, the podcast. Take a listen. Let's move to Georgia and other places where Terminator 2, Trump 2, and his MAGA have decided to file election denying lawsuits, other ways to suppress the vote, put up barriers to voting, mail-in voting, registration, counting, new counting rules, all coming to a head. Karen, you did a great hot take and analysis. Sat in and listened. I think you're on the notification list for Fulton County Courthouse and got the live feed of Judge McBurney. We're going to talk about Judge McBurney twice here, about the change in the rules of the game 35 days away from the election in Georgia, or the attempt to do that, and then these other cases. Why don't you tie it all together and tell this audience what we're talking about and what we should and what the Democrats are doing to ensure that bad things don't happen on election day or beyond.
Yeah, so just to really, first of all, this fits in nicely with what we just discussed, because what we discussed was Trump's amateur effort to steal the election in 2020, right? He dabbled in trying to steal the election back in 2016 when he tried to suppress information about a porn star and paying off that whole thing. That was election related, right? That was his toe in the water of trying to steal elections, which succeeded. He then did amateur hour trying to steal the election, and in 2020, thank God it didn't work. But he's gotten smart, and his people have gotten smart, and so they have designed this. And first of all, before I explain it, I just want to talk about how panicked Donald Trump is by Jack Smith's filing, because he has been tweeting like a crazy person since this brief came out that we just talked about. So, but if anyone's going to read his tweets where he makes all kinds of crazy accusations about, weaponizing the DOJ and it's all lies, etc., read this brief. Okay, read this brief, because it's insidious. That is the word I would use about MAGA and Donald Trump and how they are trying to manipulate this election and steal it. But this time they've gotten smarter and craftier, and they don't want to lose. And so what they're doing is they're engaging in what's called lawfare. Okay, it's like warfare, but using the law, using legal cases. And they are filing, there are some democracy organizations and lawyers, election lawyers, that are reviewing this and keeping track of it. Mark Elias is one of them. He's an expert election attorney, and he was in the New York Times, and he's been writing on this, and he's litigating many of these cases. And he's been involved in all the historical election related litigation. And what he says, and what these organizations are saying, is that more than 3 times the number of pre-election litigation lawsuits are being teed up in the states, in the battleground states, so that they're already in court. They're already talking about things like dead voters and non-citizen voters and fraud. They're already teeing these issues up, but then they're hitting pause because they're civil. And so in civil cases, there's no urgency unless the parties push for urgency. And so what they're doing is they're getting ready, right? They're kind of getting ready to have these court cases with judges ready to go so that as the election happens, they can just run in and already have a captive audience saying, look, what we said, look at what we have here. We said there was going to be all these people that weren't supposed to register, and here they are. In North Carolina, they're going after the North Carolina's identification, the requirement rules. The North Carolina tried to suppress voters from voting by essentially requiring all sorts of tricky, identification. And so what's happening, Duke University, University of North Carolina, they're providing their students with that type of identification so that the students can vote. And, and they don't like that. So they're going to court and they're challenging these identifications. I mean, they're really doing everything they can to keep voters from voting, to try to eliminate voters. And, look, and there's no, I'll tell you before we get to the McBurney part, there's no better place to highlight just how incredibly in bad faith these decisions are than in Arizona. Because in Arizona, they bring litigation about non-citizen voting. And then when they realize that the people who are going to get harmed, the people who are going to not be able to vote in Arizona are actually Republicans, not Democrats, guess what they do? Oh, well, we don't want to go forward with that lawsuit. We only want to go forward, so it's only when it's Democrats that are affected that they will make these claims and bring these cases. And it's only in battleground states, and it's only in states where, that's going to be an issue. So that just goes to show you what their actual motives are. So in Georgia, what happened this week, and, for some reason, I'm addicted to Georgia, trials and Georgia courts because they're all videotaped. I wish all trials were videotaped because you can see for yourself what is going on. You don't have to rely on what reporters say, and they might have a certain point of view or perspective, or you don't have to rely on what Donald Trump says or what the parties say. There's no spin room, for example. I can just watch it myself and say, okay, this is what's happening and this is what it is. So I absolutely love that they broadcast these things. And what happened in Georgia in McBurney's courtroom, and he's the chief judge of Fulton County at the Superior Court there. And as you pointed out, Popok, he was the judge who oversaw the special purpose grand jury that ultimately said there was enough to bring charges against Donald Trump if they were going and others. These are all the possible charges, and so then Fani Willis went into a charging grand jury and brought this indictment. And Judge McBurney, what he did was basically there was the state election board in Georgia passed these rules very recently, basically requiring the superintendents or the election boards, the counties essentially, to do a reasonable inquiry before they're permitted to certify the votes. They have to examine them and do a reasonable inquiry. And there has been a challenge to this. And look, McBurney recognized that time is of the essence because an election's about to happen. And so, we have to have this emergency hearing, and he allowed the national Republican National Committee lawyers to come in and national Democratic National Committee people to come in. So these were kind of although it was a local case about Georgia, this was high stakes that people and lawyers arguing this, basically saying, and what the plaintiffs were seeking, the pro-democracy plaintiffs, they were seeking a declaratory judgment and injunctive relief from requiring this to happen and hand counting and all of the things that Georgia is talking about doing, and the state election board is talking about doing, and there were of ballots, and there was some pretty compelling arguments talking about, first of all, what is a reasonable inquiry, right? What if people don't agree on what a reasonable inquiry is? What if in one county they said, there's 11 people who vote there? What if a reasonable inquiry means the guy does, drinks a cup of coffee and then certifies the 11 votes? Like, is that reasonable? Or what if there's 5 different, there's 5 different people, and 3 of them think a reasonable inquiry is this, but 2 think it's that, and then they vote differently, or they argue? Or what if they refuse to certify? That was another thing that was talking about, is what if the superintendents refuse to certify? Or what if they refuse to certify and or they certify the loser? They just choose to certify the loser. Then what happens? And and there was all these hypotheticals that they were talking about. What if they determine a reasonable inquiry is to hand count every single vote, and even if you put 100 people on it 24/7, it wouldn't get done before the date it's supposed to get certified, which is November 12th at 5 p.m. That, what happens then? Can they certify? Do they not certify? Can they say, well, we're doing our reasonable inquiry? I mean, so it was just this whole back and forth. And so what McBurney did a really good job doing is he got both sides to agree that certification is mandatory. Period. Full stop. They have to certify. No matter what, they have to certify. Number one. Number two, certification is mandatory by November 12th at 5 p.m. That has to happen. And he got both sides to agree to that. So he's like, so the only issue here is what is a reasonable inquiry, and whether the state election board is permitted to pass that rule, because there are statutes already that already govern what is supposed to happen. So how are they allowed to kind of impose these things, especially at the 11th hour? And what happens if, you have a bad actor that refuses to certify or certifies the wrong person? So a lot of that was discussed, and what's going to happen. And McBurney was, interesting. Although he was extremely, I should say, open to, or I think he agreed that reasonable inquiry language is very vague and open to interpretation, and frankly open to mischief making, and he's very concerned about it. So I could see him ruling in favor of the plaintiffs. However, because they agreed that it has to be certified and has to be certified from by November 12th, he was kind of saying, but you know what? So in some ways, you're asking me. There's nothing to declare. There's nothing for me to do a declaratory judgment on. You're asking for an advisory opinion, essentially. And advisory opinions are really not something that courts typically do, right? They issue rulings. And since everybody agrees, so, I don't know that, even though he was clearly sympathetic to the plaintiffs, I don't know that he's ultimately going to rule that it is within his authority to give an opinion here. But what's terrifying about it is you can just see what they're setting up to do. And places like Georgia, you're going to see that, and there are other states as well, that they are setting this up, and everybody needs to understand this, because this is what's going to happen. November 5th is going to come and go, and you're going to have places like Georgia that are going to say, oh, I'm sorry, we have to hand count, like the sloths in Zootopia, at the DMV. They're going to have to hand count, each of them. And then what's going to happen? November 12th is going to come and go, and they're going to go, oh, I'm sorry, we didn't have enough time. And during that time, Trump is going to do exactly what he did in the January 6th filing that Jack Smith wrote, which is start to sow doubt, start to say things like there's fraud, there's dead people, there's, non-citizen voting, there's all these things happening. And he's going to start getting that out into the universe. And there's going to be a lot of people who actually believe it. There's going to be court cases, and there's going to be potentially, at least what he's trying to do, is create chaos so that there is no winner, and there's no certification of the election in Congress by the vice president. And that's what he's trying to set up. And it's happening in plain sight. And it is, thank God, there are people who are watching these cases and reporting on these cases. And I'm going to make it my mission to report on as many as I can, because the more we know about them, I mean, the real answer is you go out and you vote and you win by a landslide, because that's the only way they can't get around this, I think, and get a mandate. So, that's what's happening. And that's what's going on out there. But this insidious attempt to steal the election is happening. It's happening in advance, and it's more organized, and it's more concerted than certainly it was in 2020. And the fact that this is where we are, that the Republicans who are, like this Katie Britt, who to me is like the Handmaid's Tale, meets Stepford Wives, the fact that they can't just win or lose fair and square and just shake hands and and just we all support each other and lift all boats, even if your team loses, why would you want to rip the country down by doing what MAGA is doing? I don't understand it. And, but that's where we are, and we have to fight back. Even if you don't agree with every single policy that one side or the other does, you have to be on the side of truth and ethics and decency and winning fair and square and democracy. And that is what's at stake in this election.
Welcome back, Legal AF, the podcast. If you didn't know why we called it Legal AF, well, now you know. Every Wednesday and Saturday on YouTube, right here, MeidasTouch. At 8 p.m. Eastern time, you can watch us live record. Sometimes we have 20,000, 25,000 people watching us, making us the number 1 or number 2 show on YouTube live in the world. And then you can pick us up on our audio podcast platforms. But I got some additional great news. We have a new channel in collaboration with the MeidasTouch Network. MeidasTouch and Legal AF got together and said, we're bursting at the seams with all this legal and political analysis. What should we do? I have an idea. We'll form a new channel. What do you think the name of it should be? I have another idea. Legal AF MTN for MeidasTouch Network. That's genius. We didn't really say that, but that was my artist rendering. Legal AF MTN, free subscribe right now. Help us get, listen to this number, help us get to 200,000 subscribers. We're only 3 weeks old. Wow. It's a build. Be part of our journey as part of your own. I'm curating the channel. I'm the executive producer. I'm making a lot of the content for you. I'm sitting at that intersection of law and politics, not blowing smoke or sunshine. And I brought across and joining us from the Meidas universe, all the legal commentators that you loved and appreciated over there. Karen Friedman Agnifilo, Dina Dahl's doing a new show with me once a week on the Supreme Court called What Else? Unprecedented, where we're going to analyze everything on the United States Supreme Court. And get this, Court Accountability Action. Court Accountability is going to join MeidasTouch Network, Legal AF MTN, and bring us exclusive content just for you. They sit right at that intersection of law and politics. They have their own investigative reporting arm that we're going to have access to, and they're going to be doing some original work for us that you can only find on Legal AF MTN. Take a moment and free subscribe. So until my next Legal AF podcast, Wednesdays, Saturdays, 8 p.m. Eastern time, until my next content, an event and show, an episode for Legal AF MTN, the channel, this is Michael Popok, and I'm reporting. In collaboration with the MeidasTouch Network, we just launched the Legal AF YouTube channel. Help us build this pro-democracy channel where I'll be curating the top stories, the intersection of law and politics. Go to YouTube now and free subscribe at Legal AF MTN. That's at Legal AF MTN.